Well, let's do a episode on Henry Clarke Wright, born 1797. Is that right? Very close associate of Garrison's. And one thing I guess I want to do with Wright is try to show that Garrison is not alone in his very radical positions: immediate abolitionism, anti-statism, right, and total pacifism. Henry Clarke Wright is a very interesting figure, kind of problematic too, in his way. No one ever committed himself more fully to abolitionism, to the peace movement, to radical reform, to the point where in Thoreau's journals, he describes a visit by Clarke to his home, he says, to give a speech, just after Thoreau actually settles in Concord in a home. And I guess has some people over to hear Wright's reform speech. And he does ridicule Wright. And this is not surprising. Okay, so one thing he says, though, in registering the amazing radicalness of Wright, is that Wright's ideas make all the old women nervous. Boy, I can see why, man. It's hard to believe someone's putting forward these ideas in the 1840s and 50s. And then, Thoreau goes on to really kind of in a scurrilous and scatological way attack Wright. I also think, though, that the direct influence of people like Wright and Garrison on Thoreau is immense, okay? But he's not a religious fanatic like they are, okay? And he's doing a lot of what they're doing, has the same ethics and the same politics that they do. But he does it in a secular vein. And he does it in a non-fanatical way. He's more fanatical about watching the leaves turn, and how worms work than a mass movement to change the world, but on the other hand, he agrees with this stuff, and he is, this is soon after, the Wright visit is soon after Civil Disobedience, the essay, and the night in jail and all this, and he agrees entirely with what Garrison is doing and admires him from time to time. Same with Emerson, really. Maybe Emerson's more committed to reform movements and more sympathetic. He's a giant figure, so all these people are appealing to him. They know he's sympathetic to their abolitionism and their pacifism. And one thing I just want to say real quick, though, I'll probably end up saying this again, is that Thoreau and Emerson, definitely Thoreau, is not a pacifist, okay? So Civil Disobedience is in every anthology of pacifism. King talked about it, maybe even Gandhi. Civil Disobedience is about nonviolent resistance. But Thoreau never endorses nonviolence squarely. And Emerson and Thoreau both praise John Brown. All right, that's where this whole thing disintegrates, kind of, okay? That's where the John Brown raid and the Civil War is where, and the build up to the John Brown raid, where people are disagreeing about tactics and so on, is where American reform movements of the early 19th century, magnificent in their radicalness and their visionariness, disintegrate. Right? Some people, including Wright, abandon the non-resistance, even though he's so utterly committed in the 40s and 50s and early 50s, abandons the non-resistance in the face of the Brown raid, or they get to the point, I can understand this completely, where they're going like, all right, we tried this peacefully for 20 years. Slaves are suffering every fucking day. I'm going to have to get rid of this non-resistance because anything is justified to stop slavery, all right? And nothing will stop slavery except violence. And that's something that lots of these people had to face or deny or negotiate through, including Garrison. Garrison had good things to say about Brown, but without withdrawing his non-resistance. And this is like Emma Goldman talking about Zolgotz, the assassin of McKinley. It's like, she doesn't go like, yeah, kill, kill, kill. She goes like, you can understand how someone would get to that point. If you didn't want this kind of violence, you shouldn't have acted that way, okay? Like, if you didn't want to get shot, you shouldn't have owned slaves, okay? All right, but I'm still a pacifist or whatever. That's sort of Garrison's view. But you can see everyone is having a struggle. But Wright goes straight to... I think Wright was an incredibly passionate, sort of fanatical type of person. And he went through a series of hyper-purist reform visions and ended up, again, like a lot of these people, kind of, not everyone, in a decadent phase after the Civil War, like just worried more about spiritualism and stuff like this than about the kind of radical reforms that he was pushing hard in the 1840s and stuff. Close associate of Garrison, writer for The Liberator. I want to talk about this text. It's a pamphlet, I guess you'd say, Ballot Box and Battlefield. And this is just a straightforward argument, pretty darn straightforward argument for religious anarchism. It's total anti-statism. And he argues that, I guess I've never seen quite such a extreme argument, like that you're absolutely morally obliged not to vote in a democracy as long as the government rests on violence and coercion. I personally do vote. This is an argument against voting from a pacifist standpoint. Ballot Box and Battlefield. He also, and one reason to do him is he's very punchy rhetorician. He wrote a kid's book on nonviolence called A Kiss for a Blow that actually, I think, had a pretty big audience, all right? That's an idea. Kids' books about nonviolence. I wonder what the history of that is. I'm going to read some of the passages. Like I said, this is very strong, I think. And it takes you straight from non-resistance to total anti-statism and stuff. And so it bundles all the important reforms of the early 19th century into one, like, supremely coherent vision. It expresses feminism. It expresses pacifism. It expresses abolitionism in the clearest way. He's a temperance advocate, etc. And these all flow together. I guess I find this an incredibly compelling theological vision. No, what it demands of human beings is too much, I guess you'd say. All right? Like, really hard. And this is what, I guess, the purity and intensity was unsustainable in a way, okay? Like, especially as the economy and the polity of the 19th century developed in the U.S. But nevertheless, the purity and intensity is something that I could yearn for. The consistency. Like, I think Wright's positions are consistent, clear. They strike me as true, okay, but I don't think I can live them even, But, all right. Theological arguments for nonviolence. I'm not necessarily endorsing that at all because I still don't know what I think about God. But all right. To suppose that our common Father can be pleased to see his children killing each other is to attribute to him that of which, if any human parent were guilty, we should count him as a monster of wickedness. So God's sitting there watching it and it's like, oh yeah, you should go to war. You know, like here's a holy war opportunity. You should go crusade in the Middle East. Or God approves of this war effort, even in self-defense or whatever. Should a father teach his children to kill each other when, in their view, the necessity of the case demanded, and then should countenance and urge on the brotherly fight and slaughter in his presence and an approving smile, what would be said of him? Humanity would cry out against him as an unnatural father. Every human being can look to the same God and say, my Father. Should this heavenly Father say to his children, my children, love one another? But there will be occasions when it will be necessary for you to fight and kill each other. Of these necessary occasions, you must be the judges. I would have you therefore arm yourselves. Cherish and strengthen the war spirit within you. Study the art of killing each other. And then, and actually, this is really what Christian Europe did, all right? And then, when you shall think necessity demands, in a kind of brotherly way, fall upon and kill each other. And I, your common father, will be present to aid and encourage the fraternal slaughter with my parental smile. Who could wish to be called a child of such a father? The Father of mercy is pleased to see his children fighting and killing each other. Children, brothers and sisters, in a tender, affectionate way. He's a sarcastic bastard. It's this incandescent rage. In a tender, affectionate way, children, brothers and sisters, in a tender, affectionate way, fighting, dashing out each other's brains, and tearing out each other's hearts to please and honor their common Father. No. Men kill their enemies solely to benefit themselves, not God. The war-making power assumes that this is right. This power inculcates also the right to inflict any injury short of death. And that's, Hobbes and Locke say things like this, for example, like, well, the government has the power to kill you, so it has the power to do anything, to give any lesser penalty to you. Hobbes certainly says that. Is that right? Verbatim. If to carry on human government, we may dispose of life as we see fit, and for our good, if we may kill as we see fit for our own good, in the same way and for the same end, we may dispose of all that belongs to life, like we might take everything from you. He that has forfeited life has forfeited all that belongs to it. Property and liberty are nothing without life, and no government, based on the right to destroy the latter, can ever inspire respect for the former. Can those who steal men dissuade others from stealing cattle? Can those who kill men for their own interest persuade others not to enslave them for the same end? Like a slaver who now says that it should be illegal to steal cattle. What? If you're pro-military, if you recognize like that killing can be right, on what grounds do you reject slavery? If killing can be right under certain circumstances, why can't enslaving people be right under certain circumstances? Can man-killers abolish man-stealing? Can the military abolish slavery? What moral influence can he who wields the sword have over him who wields only the lash? Property and liberty can never be regarded as sacred under a government that assumes power over life. So this is the basic problem with government as he sees it. It assumes power over life, which is God's. A war-making government can afford no protection to human rights because in assaulting life, the right on which all human rights depend, it teaches its subjects and all others that man may be plundered of every right, and that for the interests of the plunderers. This power takes no account, the military power takes no account of the guilt or innocence of the victims. You can see this going on right now in Gaza, Ukraine, etc., Sudan. It kills those whom it acknowledges to be guilty of no crime, and often for doing what it admits it is their right and duty to do. to defend their homeland, for instance. It sometimes enters into a compact to kill men for what, by its own decisions, is obedience to God. It kills men for doing what the killers themselves would do in like circumstances. We kill you for defending your homeland. We would defend our homeland in similar circumstances. It says to the enemy, we will send a spy into your camp, and if you catch and hang him, you are murderers. But if you send one into ours and we can catch him, it would be our duty to hang him and thus retaliate. So it says like there's a completely different ethics for you and for me. It says to the Indians, and Wright is magnificent defender of the rights of Indians and just scathing about what the U.S. government, and particularly like Andrew Jackson, is doing to the Seminoles and stuff like this over and over again. Henry Clarke Wright sees that more clearly than any American of his period. It says to the Indians, we will enter your country, seize your crops, cattle, houses, and lands, and appropriate them to our own use. And this is right. But if you attempt to do so to us, it is our right and duty to destroy you. Like, what kind of ethical system runs like that? None that we can formulate, okay? It says to the Africans, we will steal and enslave you, but if you attempt to steal and enslave us, we will kill you. It says to the slaves, if we were in your circumstances, we would regain liberty by blood. But if you attempt to do so, we will shoot you down. And then he, later on here, and this is not the only place that Wright does this, he praises Nat Turner, even though Nat Turner was violent, right? But what he says is, again, like this kind of thing, like, well, what do you expect? All right. If you're going to do this to people, right, you invite that and you approve the tactics by which you will be killed by the people you've oppressed. That's a hell of a position in 1850 in the U.S., right? Like pro-Nat Turner, pro-slave rebellion, with no, not like dicking around either, just saying this is completely understandable. To say that God has authorized human governments to wield military power is to say that he has absolved them from all allegiance to him, that he has abdicated his throne in their favor, and that the subjects of such governments have no duties to their creator, which are paramount to their duties to their fellow men who rule over them. And then he says, and then this is an anti-voting pamphlet. If a man consents to vote in this government, there are some things against which he has no right to vote. No man can honestly accept the office of voter and then vote against the existence of the government, which they should do, according to Wright. The war-making power, it should be, I guess, is essential to its existence. No voter can consistently or honestly vote against that power. When he votes for a congressman or president, he must vote for them as they are defined by the Constitution. As they are defined, congressmen and the president are men invested by the nation with the power to make war. Take away that power, and the offices cease to exist. Government rests on violence. Government would be abolished if it gave up the war-making power, if it gave up its claim to a monopoly of violence. So these people draw the direct anarchist conclusions. Lucretia Mott who's much milder in these ways than Wright, says stuff like this, like she's arguing for women's suffrage. But that's tough if you're this kind of pacifist, right? Like you think you shouldn't even participate at all in this war-like government, all right? Lucretia Mott says this, like, well, if you're going to give the right to vote to men, she says this, far be it from me to say that anyone should vote in the current situation of war-like governments of force. Okay. No one should vote. But if men have the right to vote, then women must have the right to vote. I would advise them not to vote for the same reasons that Henry Clarke Wright advises them not to vote. because you don't want to participate. You are morally obliged not to participate in the violence, the slavery, okay, which is implicitly and explicitly supported by the U.S. government, and the war-making power you have repudiated, so you can't vote, right? But you certainly should have the right to vote if men do. This is how far this goes, I guess, sort of against American patriotism, and how little worried Henry Clarke Wright is about selling this to mainstream America. How about this paragraph? Congressmen and the president are the agents of the voters, is the section. Congress and the president. These officers were created, and their powers and duties defined by a convention of 40 men, half of whom were man-stealers, and all of them man-killers, assembled in Philadelphia in 1787, chosen and sent there to frame a government. They framed this present Constitution and submitted it to the voters for their adoption. The voters adopted it. So these offices with their military powers and duties were created and defined by the voters, and every time they meet at the polls to vote for a congressman and a president, they adopt them with all their essential elements, all their violence and murderousness and man-stealing for their own. I mean, I don't know if that surprised you that someone in 1850 could go like, well, there was this convention in American advocate of freedom. Could go like, well, there was a convention of 40 people. Half of them were friggin' slavers. And this is what they came up with, man. But I don't blame them, actually. I blame the voters that ratified that thing. Because the acts of an agent are the acts of the employer. Now, this is a kind of reverse social contract argument. We do the deeds which we employ others to do. By my agent I build a house. Though I strike not a blow with my own hands, it is my work. To steal, rob, or murder by the hands of others is the same as to do them with our own. So this is a pretty, wide extension now of pacifism. It's like you can't indirectly participate or motivate violence in this way, or approve not along with violence in this way. Pacifism obliges you to withdraw your participation from violence in any form. However guilty our agents may be, our guilt is the same as if our own hands had done the deed. Slaveholders wish to drive the Seminole Indians from Florida. Really one of the most brutal and absurd elements of the Indian War, prosecuted by Andrew Jackson, among others. Zachary Taylor, too, man. That because, for one thing, the Seminoles sheltered fugitive slaves in the Florida wetlands. That their fugitive slaves may no longer find refuge among them. They harass them, destroy their crops and stock on purpose to provoke them to retaliate. The Indians do retaliate. Slaveholders raise the cry of Indian massacre and apply to Congress and the President for protection. These officers, being employed by the electors for this very purpose, butcher men and women and children till they are exterminated. Who is responsible? Not only the officers and soldiers, congressmen and the President, but primarily and above all, the electors. And he doesn't mean the members of the Electoral College. He means everyone who voted. They create and sustain these war-making offices. And the robbery and murder committed on the hunted Seminole are their own work. Then he goes on to talk about Nat Turner. Each voter is the Congress, the President, the Commander-in-Chief, the Constable, Jailer, and Hangman, the Army and Navy, and when the Seminoles and Cherokees are plundered and murdered, the fugitive slave taken back in chains and tears, the slave trade carried on, the slave shot down for doing what the nation declares is obedience to God, like fighting for liberty. These deeds are done by the 2.5 million of voters, all the voters in the United States, and each voter is principal in these acts of villainy and outrage. Each voter breaks all the necks that are broken by the government and does all the shooting and stabbing done by it. A bullet is in every ballot. Like, that's, wild in its purity and intensity, I say. And if I'm sure Thoreau was right that Henry Clarke Wright's positions scared old women and young men too. I guess you think about the courage it takes to take positions like that, but it's also worth emphasizing that these people are not taking these positions alone. They have organizations and beautiful bunches of people and lovely texts and shit, including Thoreau and Emerson, to back up their basic orientation, right? Whatever Thoreau might have thought about Wright personally. These are individualists, but they're not acting qua individuals. They are acting as a movement, incomparably radical movement. Antinomian anarchism, I guess, and just total nonviolence. All right, beautiful vision. Although, really put forward in quite a slash and burn manner by Henry Clarke Wright. All right, I want to do episodes now on the next two. I think will be Aiden Ballou, also very close with Garrison, and maybe the person who most carefully developed the idea of pacifism or non-resistance, and Lucretia Mott, the great abolitionist and feminist, Quaker, and her testimony of peace. So we'll be doing those two next in one order or another.